Welcome to another episode of the High Vibe Sobriety podcast. I'm so excited to welcome Patrick Haize as our guest today. Welcome, Patrick.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Patrick,
Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Patrick is a transformational mentor, a musician, an extremely wise, woke, and sovereign human being. And Patrick, people really trust you, I myself being one of them. And I came across your YouTube channel a few years ago and have been following you since. And without knowing it, Patrick, you had a huge impact on my own recovery and my own spiritual awakening process. So thank you for being here today.
Oh, thanks so much. I really appreciate that. It always feels good to hear when what I've worked so hard to put out has helped people. So I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. So after that introduction, I'm hoping to humanize you a bit and ask you to share your own story with your battle with addiction for our listeners, just so they have an idea of exactly how far you've come and the transformation you've made. So do you mind sharing that with us today?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, well, so thanks for having me on. I really appreciate this. And it's always an honor for me to share this side of my story, because it's not something that I do addiction counseling. I work with people in that department for sure, but it's not like my thing, like my only thing by any means. I do a lot of different things, and but it is something that had such a large impact on my evolution and my growth. I mean, that story is such like a key aspect to my whole transformation, that to be able to share that with other people and hopefully, have some things there that could help other people through their own struggle is such a blessing to be able to have that to offer others. So I appreciate these opportunities. And I appreciate people like you that are doing sobriety podcasts, things where that's is like more your thing, because we need this. The world needs this. The whole world is addicted right now in so many different ways. And so I really appreciate the work that you're doing too.
Thank you.
So a little bit about my story. Well, I could say how it ended, right? I'll start with how it ended. It ended in 2011, the end of 2011. It was December of 2011. And I was homeless at the time, and I was in a treatment center, an underground ibogaine clinic, actually. Are you familiar with iboga?
No.
So iboga is it's an entheogenic or a psychedelic plant from Africa. It was the Bwiti tribe is the tribe that this plant, the iboga root, was the central like mystic of their whole tribe in a sense, right? It's kind of like the Shipibo people and ayahuasca, right? So, but it was iboga, and iboga has this uncanny capacity to detox people from opiates without having to go through the intense physiological withdrawals that are typically associated with a detox from opiates. And it also has an uncanny ability to reset the neurological pathways in the brain, which after a long line of addiction, those neurological pathways get wrapped into very cyclical, addictive myelinations, right? So like addictive thinking becomes patternized in the brain, and it has more than any other medicine or psychedelic resets your neurological pathways. So I had found an underground clinic, and I was homeless at the time, and I had made it into Mexico because it's not legal in the States. You have to do it in Mexico. I had made it into Mexico to an underground clinic that was in a unfurnished building in the greater Tijuana area, and it was December in 2011, right before it was about to be 2012. And this was in 2012 was really kind of like this big wake up call for me. I was anticipating this big change, and in many ways there was a big change, but I felt like this is it. I have to get clean. So it was an alarm clock of sorts for me on my path. And so I was able to actually do that. I was able to get clean in December 2011. anticipating December 21st, 2012, the end of the Mayan calendar and all of that. And and then, from that point on is the life that I'm more public about, that I, talk about online. But prior to that, like what led me through that whole process to being homeless in Mexico, I mean, that's where it ended. I was homeless in Mexico. I had almost no money to my name, and I saved up just enough to do this, ibogaine detox in an underground clinic. It wasn't even in a traditional, legitimate facility. But it saved my life because I was ready to change. Like I had made that choice within myself that I was that I wasn't going to let this thing kill me, because I was really close. It was close to doing that. But where the whole addiction started, so it ended with heroin, right? And that was what and heroin amongst other things, but that was the one that really had me bound tightly, was there. And because of the severity of the physiological addiction that you get when you're using opiates regularly, that was the one that really bound me. But where it all started, to be honest, where it really started was in the traumas that I experienced pre-drug use, right? So, and this is, I think, a key fact, and I won't go into that because that's a whole different story when you're talking about trauma and abuse and things like that. But anybody that's suffering addiction has traumas that are at the root of that. And in fact, every single person on the planet has traumas that we've all experienced. This is part of being in this world, just the way the world is that we experience trauma. But my trauma was severe to the point where by age about 11 or 12, I was locked. I felt like it was completely locked. I couldn't communicate. I couldn't express myself. And I just remember being so frozen that I literally I would walk around school. At this point, I had been kicked out of regular schools, and I was in a school for drug addicts and criminals. Everyone was on probation in the school that I was at. And so probation officers would come in, and people get urine tests and stuff. So it was more like a treatment center / like jail school in a sense. And I was so stuck and afraid at that point that I literally would walk around and I couldn't speak. I would said almost nothing, and I just felt so frozen the whole time. And this was this state of lockedness that I'd gotten into after all these, the traumas that I experienced. And I was sent to the doctor and evaluated by a regular psychiatrist, and I was put on different medications. So I was put on Zoloft for depression, and I was put on Adderall for ADHD. And that was really kind of, besides my family's addictive cycles, that was the first kind of really solid introduction to, if you don't feel okay, take this thing and it will solve your problem. And it did seemingly solve my problem for some time, because when I took the Zoloft, I stopped feeling emotionally emotionally stuck. Like things that bothered me didn't bother me anymore. Nothing bothered me. And if I took only Zoloft, nothing would have excited me either. But that paired with the amphetamines that they were giving me also made me extremely euphoric. And Adderall will boost your dopamine like 6 times the natural level. So I was tweaked out basically, and but it felt amazing because I was free again at this point. And so I felt, I was able to do schoolwork, and it was in a way it was actually quite I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't had those few years in the 2 or 3 years in the beginning, that I had a really great time and started developing, more of a healthy ego in relation to, how I thought of myself, because I was really on this edge of depression, potentially suicide. And then I had this kind of it relieved me of those pains, and I was able to express myself and run around and have a great time. And I did for several years. And then eventually, by the time I was about 19 or so, my body started rejecting the Adderall. I couldn't sleep and I couldn't eat anymore. And so it was really starting to irritate me. Now, in that time, when I was at that school, because it was clinically, I was prescribed the Adderall. I did actually get sober while they were testing me, except for, what I mean is I got sober from drinking alcohol or smoking weed or doing the other drugs that I was doing. I was still on the Adderall because it was given to me by the doctor. And funny enough, while I was on the Adderall, I went through the 12-step program, because that was one of the things they encouraged at the school. So that was my first introduction to the 12-step program, was when I was about 13 and 14 years old. I started going to AA meetings and NA meetings. And I actually worked the 12 steps while high on Adderall, which is, kind of funny. But nonetheless, it was one of the first seeds that were planted for a spiritual kind of practice, and there are a lot of roots that are, spiritual roots, like connected to the 12-step programs that I'm really grateful for. The 12 steps has, we can talk about that later, but I'm really grateful for my experience with that, because it showed me, if there's something broken and you realize that, like how to step out of denial when something is broken and realize that you need help, right, is a really important step there. And then also the idea of the ninth step is really the one that really sticks out to me a lot, which is making amends, right? So, and it's similar to the idea in Christianity of like repenting, right? In a sense, it's like taking responsibility for yourself in the situations and not seeing yourself so much as a victim, but taking responsibility for these aspects of yourself. So I went through those processes, and it did make a big impression on me. But long story short, by the time I was about 19 years old, my body started rejecting those medicines, and I started the pharmaceuticals, and I started also drifting away, probably about 17, from the NAAA spheres, and started drinking again and using other drugs, and then I went to engineering school. And I was using the Adderall to graduate engineering school, and I did, but it was really harsh on my body. I was needing to drink copious amounts of alcohol just to fall asleep because of how wired I was from the Adderall, smoking tons of cannabis, and then taking other things here and there as it came across my plate. But eventually I had to stop taking Adderall because it was affecting my nervous system. I couldn't sleep and I couldn't eat. And this was right around the time that Oxycontin started hitting the streets in the Bay Area. I was in Emeryville, East Bay at this time, which is in Northern California. It's near Berkeley and Oakland. And so at that time, when Oxycontin started hitting the streets, it came across my plate, and it was, to me, I was like, this is it. Because now granted, the reason why I felt like, I should say this first. When my body was rejecting the Adderall, but when I didn't take Adderall, I could not function. I was back to that 11-year-old kid where like I couldn't act or move. I had no motivation. I just felt like a weight on me and there's nothing I could do. So I needed the Adderall in order to kind of function, but the Adderall was affecting my system. So I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? So when opiates came along, when Oxycontin came along, it was like, this is it, because I can sleep, I can eat, I feel amazing, and it kind of solved that problem that I had. But this one had an even shorter, say, positive effect time before it started, causing turmoil in my life. But I spent basically the next 10 years or so addicted to opiates amongst, a plethora of other substances. I mean, really like anything you can name just about. And but the real kind of anchor that kept me locked was the opiates. And I had a short period of sobriety, little stints, like 3 weeks to a month here and there. There's a deer out the window. Awesome. Like 3 months, like a month to like 2 months, or 3 weeks to like 2 months would be like the longest stints that I would have, like here and there throughout that 10-year period. And towards about my age 25, I started, I got clean at one point for almost a full year, and I started exploring a lot with hallucinogenics, with psychedelics, and in many ways that opened me up a lot. And then I also got very interested, and I had always been interested in, but especially from about like 2008, 2009, I really started getting into esoteric knowledge and esoteric wisdom. And I realized that this addiction was something that was not sustainable, and I had to get past it, but I just didn't know how to do it. Every time I tell myself I'm going to quit, it's like I had this like gut wrenching, feeling that I knew I was lying to myself, and so I would try to, but then it wouldn't work out, and I would relapse back and then get, stuck on it for long periods of time. But my body was starting to really deteriorate. I was having all sorts of health issues starting to come up, and it was getting scary. So I started studying all of these, esoteric texts and self-help, and building a foundation of psychology and philosophy that was helping me on the mental realm to create I say like an optimistic or a functional framework that could act as a safety net, so that when I was able to let go of this, this thing that was stabilizing my emotions and kind of freeing me in a sense from my trauma stuck states, that I would have something to stand on when I finally quit. And eventually it just got worse and worse and worse. I went through a really bad breakup, and then ended up homeless, and then spiraled all the way out, and finally was able to kind of pull myself together through various miracles that came along my path, in which I found myself being able to scrape up the last amount of money that I had to get into this treatment, this underground kind of like treatment situation, and go through that process, which I did. And then after I made it through there, I remember I had almost like no energy. I was standing in line waiting to get across the Mexican border to come back, and I didn't have a place to stay. I was still staying in crack houses at this point. And but I spent the next couple months finding the legal ways to make money, and saved up a little bit of money, went and stayed with family members for like a month and a half after I got enough money to get the ticket to go fly out, and then saved up a little bit more money. And within 9 months of crossing the border back to America, I had stabilized myself with my own apartment again, and got my business back and running, which was one that fell apart when I was using all the drugs. And then by the graces of of God, I found an opportunity at Vision magazine in San Diego, which was an esoteric magazine, more of like a new age magazine, I should say, that hired me on. And then I rose to the level of creative director there, and that really kind of liberated me from my old life in many ways. I actually moved into the office at Vision magazine over in a different part of San Diego, and it connected me in with this whole different world. So I kind of was able to step away from the scene of like drug festival scene, and step into a new realm where I could feel passionate about what I was doing. And that was really kind of the launch pad for me, that led me to, eventually I left the magazine and said, okay, now I'm going to travel the country and follow my heart. And then I landed in Sedona without even really knowing anything about Sedona. I came across it, and then it basically kidnapped me here. And then from that point forward, my goal was to do what was in my heart, to follow my heart, and not compromise myself anymore, to placate to fears of not being able to function in the society. And to a decent degree, I've been able to follow through with that. And so then the person I have become is the person that then I've presented myself as through my YouTube channel and all of my other public expressions. So I think that's a pretty good rendition or explanation of my story.
That's an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing. And so you spoke a lot about what helped you get sober, what would you say really contributed to, obviously there's a lot of trauma that you have to deal with. Like the hard part is maintaining the sobriety, right? It's actually easier to get sober because eventually you hit that rock bottom. But I found for myself that maintaining that sobriety, all of the trauma that was coming up and all of the emotions that you have to deal with, what helped you? Were there any kind of modalities, therapies, mentors that helped you on your journey?
Oh, so many. So your question is it what how did you're saying it's difficult to stay sober, and what modalities did I use to remain sober? Is that essentially what you're asking? Yeah. Okay. Well, I had an interesting experience. It's like I fought addiction my whole life. It really felt like, from when I was like really, I mean, when I was conscious of I started becoming conscious of the addiction even when I was like 15 or 16 years old. Like really, well, even before that, because the AA I started going to 13, 14. So I started really reflecting on the idea of addiction. And so, I'm about 14 years or so. And there was this point in which my body was breaking down so much, and I had seen myself attempt but fail so many times that it became truly like a decision of life or death. It wasn't a like it was so much easier to continue to relapse for me and go back onto it when it was still in a sense serving me, and I was getting like more benefit from it than I was getting negativity from it. There just was a certain threshold that I crossed where it was, my life was more valuable to me than what would happen from that from going back out and using more. And it's like the traumas I even experienced from doing drugs. I mean, I would have, when your autonomic nervous system stops, your autonomic breathing function stops operating, which is how a lot of opiate addicts die, is they stop breathing while they're sleeping. I'm very attuned to my body in a lot of ways, luckily, that I could notice when that stopped happening, and I had to breathe intentionally with my mind. And that started happening all the time, to the point where like every single night for months, I'd be, if I was too high as I was falling asleep and I realized that my breathing was off, that I was scared to fall asleep because I knew that I would die if I did. And I would nod off uncontrollably and then wake up gasping for air in these panics, because I was, and I'd have these weird dreams where like I started dying in my dream, and then I'd have to wake up and I hadn't been breathing, and I breathe a lot. And so like I have these kinds of things or have been constipated for so long that like major issues with my gut were going on. Like these kinds of things were so drastic that when I finally quit, it was, it just wasn't an option anymore for me. And I know that might not be like the best answer, because for somebody that's like, oh, how do I quit? It was like, there was something changed in me. And this is the most difficult thing when you're working with people in addiction. It's like, there's a certain threshold, and this is what they talk about, like if you hit rock bottom, right? What is rock bottom? Rock bottom's that thing where it's like, okay, something changed now. You have that moment of clarity. They talk about it in AA, where something changed. And for me, it just became so blatantly clear that that I wasn't going to survive. And then all those other things that are valuable to me in life, that I would be leaving behind, came into my awareness, and I realized the choice that I had. It was like, and part of this was was facilitated by the iboga also, because I had a vision in the iboga. I'll get into modalities that I use here in a little bit. I had a vision with iboga in which I witnessed myself die. And so I saw myself die, and then I watched my family's reaction to my death. Like I saw that, and that was the most one of the most impactful experiences I've ever had in my life is to witness that, and to also feel the guilt and to feel the weight of that reality. And I had and along with that experience, I also had this experience in which I went into this movie theater, and it was like the movie theater of my life. And it was so sad, because it was just this big spiral down into this, pathetic ending. And so it was very clear to me, that path, that was the ending to that path. And I saw what that was. And so for me, there was no other choice. Now, as far as modalities that helped, I think that really the way to go about it is from all angles, right? So the first thing that I did that really was helpful is starting to get the biological support necessary. Because if you don't have the right hormones running through your system, if you don't have the right nourishment in your system, like that, I mean, it literally affects your mind, your consciousness. And we all know how powerful it is. Like if you're not eating the right foods, you're mineral deficient in a certain way, how big of an effect that can have on your consciousness. And what triggers us into negative decisions are negative states of being, right? We make our decisions based off of the state that we're in. So how can we help to supplement our state? So the first thing I started doing was I got really into herbalism. I got really into, and I had already been slightly into it more from the angle of like, I was into taking drugs and like mixing weird chemicals and like taking all sorts of stuff to feel good. So it was an easy kind of transition to get into herbs that were non-narcotic and be like, oh, I can take this or I can take that, and use it in different ways. And so I got into that. I got into, medicinal mushrooms and like all sorts of different, I don't mean psychedelic ones. I mean like, reishi and chaga and these kinds of mushrooms. I got into all that, and that really started helping me kind of just boost my like set point mood by getting my biology like online. So there's that level. The other modality is optimistic thinking. That is such an important thing, right? Especially because the addictive mentality is oftentimes so connected to this like hopelessness or nothing matters. You need to somehow justify destroying your life and your body. Like when you see yourself doing that, it's like there has to be this kind of nihilistic like rejection of all things that are important in order to justify that behavior. So learning to think more optimistically, right? And part of learning optimism, I borrowed that from a lot of different areas. So from like esoterics to self-help, but part of that comes from recognizing and contemplating the opportunity that we're given here as an incarnated soul here on this planet, right? And people may have different beliefs as far as what they think human beings are here for, but in my exploration and the conclusions I've come to is that without going too deep in it, this is a tremendous opportunity for us to be able to expand and evolve our beingness as a soul beyond the body. And if we let something like addiction spiral us down, we miss this incredible opportunity. And that's going to make it harder for us the next time that we come back here or any other place that we go to. Like you got to beat it. If you don't beat it this time, you're going to have to beat it another time. So with that, then understanding the power of optimism in helping you do that, right? I mean, optimism is an incredibly powerful capacity. And just to show how powerful a thought is, if you just think of, if you realized you won the lottery without anything changing other than you like saw that slip of paper that you won the lottery, you can imagine how much that would affect even your biology, like how excited you would be. Like, it's crazy. I actually thought I won $300,000 once. It was actually 300, but so I felt actually what it was like, and it was, my heart went so crazy, I almost had a heart attack. It was like insane, but all it was a thought. right? It was just a thought in that moment. I didn't have the money in my hands, right? It was just a thought in that moment. It just goes to show how powerful a thought can be, right? So you can construct your thinking world to be something that literally binds you to, you know, weakness, or you can construct it in a way in which it becomes, you know, a free energy machine. And so in realizing that, there was like, okay, well, how do I do that? Because this, in the same thing that drugs are doing, which is getting me to release all these neurochemicals in my mind, you can release neurochemicals in your mind by going through a series of thought patterns, right? So if you get good at creating a certain series of thought patterns and consistent with those, then you can actually literally create neurological effects and hormonal secretions and neurotransmitter secretions that can do similar things to what the drugs are doing. Albeit though, it takes willpower, it takes more effort, right? And this is the value of that, right? You build a force, your soul builds a force of dedication and willpower. That's something you take with you after death, right? So physical body, you know, optimistic thinking, right? Which in the thinking kind of bleeds into the you know, spiritual practice, right? Like finding purpose, finding meaning in the world, and then of course one that I should say that that is definitely part of this too is trauma release. Mm-hmm. You know, doing some sort of, you know, going through some sort of trauma release, you know, therapy to be able to release these, you know, stuck states. In a lot of ways, one term that people use is soul retrieval, but our soul oftentimes has gotten frozen and taken offline, different aspects of ourselves. You know, the freedom we felt oftentimes as kids, where we're just like feeling amazing every day, right? What happens to that? Well, a lot of it becomes atrophied and crystallized into frozen, and that frozen aspect of ourself then is experienced as a weight on top of us, or as you know, a lack of motivation, or, you know, negative, just like a haze of negativity. And by going back and facing those traumas and being able to mobilize those stuck emotions, you can bring those aspects of your soul back online. And when they come back online and you direct them in a healthy direction, then you become the master again of all of that energy that was locked at one point and was just grinding against you. So I would say those four primary, and those are broad categories, but those four primary categories: the thinking, optimistically, the emotional trauma release, working on the physical body, so health, and then spiritual connection.
Absolutely. And I relate to so much that you just said. Like, my own rock bottom ended in me almost committing suicide. So I knew that when I was done, I was done. There was no going back. There was no option for me. Like, drinking again, using again, there was no option. And those four things that you mentioned are actually on my list of what contributed to my maintaining my own sobriety. Nutrition for sure was a big one. I'm now a holistic nutritionist because nutrition had such a huge impact on my recovery. And the positivity one, a lot of people say that you have to be careful not to be get into toxic positivity, right? But when you first need to get sober, it's like you almost need to be need to get to that level of toxic positivity just to get to that next stage. For myself, I know I had to, because I was so traumatized that the only thing that could get me to that next step was just to think positive. Even if it was toxic positivity in that moment, I just needed to think that way in order to get to the next step. And then I was able to start working on trauma release, but that took me a while to be able to get there and to be able to sit with my emotions. Because I find a lot of people in recovery, when they first get sober, they replace it with a need to constantly be busy, and they have a hard time being still and being just sitting in their emotions and sitting with their thoughts. And I think that's part of it, like just the not wanting to sit with your thoughts and not wanting to sit with your emotions. But I feel it's also because you almost feel like you need to make up for lost time. Like, you grieve all those years that you lost, that you feel that you need to make up for it by being busy. And you feel that being still isn't being productive, but it's actually the complete opposite. Like I found that like there's no way I would be where I'm at now if I didn't learn to be still and learn to process those emotions and the traumas I went through. And in that that state of being still, that's when you create. And then, you know, like you have to honor those ebbs and flows in life, right? Like there's a time to go inward and heal and rest and create. And then there's a time to take action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I really can relate to that. I remember feeling so much anxiety that, you know, there's so much I have to do that, because in finding my purpose, I felt my purpose is to give back in some way. Yeah. And so then when I finally got clean and my goal was to give back, there was, 15 years of anxiety of, that I've been wasting all this time. And so I felt like I have to, go. But it's, and I've said this many times, one of my favorite quotes is a quote by the Navy SEALs, and it says, "Slow is smooth and smooth is fast." Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And that's very much what you're talking about, right? Which is that to be able to actually get in touch with your power requires you to slow down and be able to come into a state of peace to then even access it. And when you're spinning around from the anxiety, it actually takes you further away from your power. And I think this is a symptom of the materialistic world that we live in, that that there's so much more of a there's so much more credit given to in our culture for external production, mm-hmm. that in order to success is defined by what you've produced externally and what's seeable in your material life in so many ways. Whether this is I've reached a lot of people and you can look at all the people that have downloaded my videos, or whether I've made this much money or I've built this institution, whatever it is, it's very externalized, where there's not enough even capacity to acknowledge or perceive the kind of deep evolution that someone can go through just in their relationship to their own being. And then through that, and through that purification is ultimately where the greatest good can be done, and I think people underestimate the power that a soul has, a human has, to transform the world by literally transforming their own subjective relationship, their own internal space, regardless of the external, the obvious external accomplishments that they've created.
Yeah, absolutely. And since you mentioned it, let's get into the importance of finding purpose, finding a mission, and being of service to others. Why is that so important in recovery? And what advice would you give to someone who's struggling to even find their purpose?
Yeah. Finding a purpose is extremely important, just very simply because everybody loves to feel good. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have a greater purpose, then our purpose becomes to just indulge in what feels good. And this is one of the things that leads people to addiction in the first place, is that I remember having the mentality of, well, I just like getting high and drinking and, partying. And so I just want to do that all the time. That's how I want to spend my life, is doing that. And so I will do whatever thing I need to in the economic world in order to give me enough money to just do that. And so then, and all the people I was around were the same way. It's like people worked in order to get money so that then they could just party. And the more money they had and more time they had to party, then the more they would just party and not do anything else. Because it was just about feeling good. It's this hedonistic, kind of modus operandi. Mm-hmm. And while that can be very pleasurable, it's not fulfilling, right? And this is the kind of the brick wall that kind of lifestyle, a person living that lifestyle eventually runs into, that it hollows out your soul, right? You're like, there's, there's not a greater fulfillment, which is an indicator that it's out of alignment with, you could say, like universal law, right? Universal law is oftentimes, you can see a tree by its fruits, right? So universal law it will demonstrate that you're in alignment with universal law if you're feeling fulfilled, if you're healthy, if you're fulfilled, if you have harmonious relationships, if you like all these different things. And whenever somebody's living a lifestyle where it's just about feeling good, everything else suffers. Everything else in your life will suffer, because you're sacrificing everything in order to feel good, if that's your purpose, right? Mm-hmm. So the purpose needs to shift. And it actually, this is what growing as a soul really becomes in a lot of ways, is how can you, and this goes back to like you can see this in all areas of life. How can you postpone instant gratification, postpone pleasure, in order to invest in something that's for the greater good long term, or just to invest in, and that could be thought of in a worldly way or in like a spiritual way. So long term could be, and this could just be seen through, somebody that just blows their money every time they get it on things that are pleasurable, versus someone that saves up and then eventually can invest that money and then create a better life for them long term. That's a way of thinking of it, just in responsible 3D terms. But then thinking of it to the next level is, well, what's your infinite bank account? Because still at the end of the, when you die, like you're going to lose all of your materials, right? So however flashy or fun your life is, there's great memories, of course, but what do you actually take with you? You take those soul qualities that you develop. So if part of your purpose is to develop as a soul, then focusing on things like compassion, focusing on making part of your purpose things like compassion or peacefulness or love or sharing or tolerance or understanding, like all these things, if this becomes part of your purpose, these are things, developing willpower. These things are things that are eternal. You'll take these with you when you die. That will be an aspect of your soul that you've constructed that you'll move forward with. And that's the infinite bank account, right? So then back to what I was saying is, as far as the being able to postpone instant gratification for something that is greater. What the path oftentimes becomes is if you choose to make a higher purpose your goal, then you find out that oftentimes what it's about is about taking on greater responsibility. And what it's about is learning to become stronger than the difficulties that you will willingly put yourself through in order to do what you know is right and what will help you in the long term. Mm-hmm. And so, and that then becomes something that's both selfless and selfish, right? Because when you develop greater compassion, you're developing yourself in a way that's very fruitful, but you're also developing a capacity that's good for others. And so then a lot of it becomes, okay, my instant gratification would like to do this, or my ego doesn't like this, what this person did, so it wants to react in this with vengeance or in this way. And you, instead of you start focusing on, how do I become stronger, a stronger person to which I can align with what is the right thing to do and be that right thing, even in the face of difficulty. Right. So, and that higher purpose, for me, that's, virtue is a higher purpose of mine that I try to live by. And, so that to me is one of the real important aspects of creating a higher purpose. Because if we don't find a higher purpose to live by, then basically we will just play out the cultural flaws that we've inherited, which is materialism and and hedonism and addiction.
An incredible answer. Thank you for that. I also want to speak to spiritual awakening, which is very common when going through, I guess, hitting a rock bottom or going through any tower moments in our lives. And why does that so often happen, like a spontaneous awakening, when we go through tower moments?
Well, it's almost like, so realizations can happen both internally or externally. And, it's this divine design by which the external world has reflections for us, in which, and a lot of it, I think, it connected, the timing has to do with your soul's intention with incarnating and the astrology and how everything kind of lines up together. But there are these moments that you talk about, tower moments or rock bottom moments. These moments, to me, I see as a like a collaborative lesson that is learned between the soul and the guiding forces of the laws of the universe. And some lessons need to be fully lived through. So some lessons you can learn from other people's mistakes. You can kind of see it in advance and say like, oh, okay, wait, you know what? I think this is going in the wrong direction. I'm going to and you can kind of cut it off before it goes too far. But there's certain lessons, just due to the orientation of where our souls are at in our own evolution, certain lessons that when we come to this place, we need to experience the totality of it to actually get the lesson. And these rock bottom moments where we have these moments of clarity are these culmination points of lessons for us. And so, you could go really deep philosophically into, well, what is it that is creating this particular moment to have to come to this? But in a broad sense, like I said earlier, I think it has to do with your soul's level of development, and then the astrology and like the lesson that you're here to learn. But ultimately, I think that the why they're so powerful is because it's a culmination point, in which all of your decisions, usually we're running from something. We're running from being able to acknowledge the truth about something. And we've doubled down on that running for so long that an entire physical manifestation needs to orchestrate itself into place to literally like shake us awake. And it does that in a very intricate way. And that shaking awake process eventually comes to a culmination point. And then in that moment, it's like the light comes on. It's like, oh, you have this realization. And it hits so hard because it's so obvious, and there's so many different pieces that you've observed and ignored, that once you finally hit that threshold of like, okay, now like I can't be denied anymore, you see all of it at once because you've had blinders on for so long. So it feels like this, it's this huge punch when you finally see it. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly.
That's awesome. Thank you. I also wanted to talk about, one of the reasons I was really drawn to you is you teach a lot about, I guess, like the Christic teachings, but more like Christian teachings, but more of like an esoteric approach, I guess. Is that what you would call it? I actually grew up in a Christian household, but my interpretation of like the Bible and I guess the teachings of Jesus are very different than what they were when I grew up. And I do find a lot of people when they first enter recovery, they have a really difficult time grasping the idea of like a God or a higher power because of religious programming that they had growing up that turned them away from like the Bible or the idea of a God, because the way that they were, I guess, interpreted it, or the way that they were taught made them feel a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. I know I can like relate to that. And that at first really turned me away from the Bible. And it took me down a spiritual path. And I started exploring other different kind of like cultures, beliefs, religions. But then I ended up going back to the Bible, and now I interpret it very differently. So what would you say to someone, like the difference, can you explain the difference between spirituality and religion to help someone, I guess, kind of grasp this concept that religion isn't necessarily spirituality?
Right. Well, so the difference between spirituality and religion is what's interesting, because I feel that even the term spirituality is starting to like crystallize as like like saying religion in a new age language, which new age has become like a religion in itself also. But in the way that you intended the question, what I would say to answer that is that religion oftentimes has a lot of dogmas attached to it that 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 are misinterpretations and kind of get in the way of the true spirit that's behind it. And so, and then maybe spirituality in the way you meant it when you asked the question is not being bound to the restrictive dogmas. And there's another way of thinking of it that came to me at first. And what was that? It was that what was that? So you can think of, if you think of the health industry, a lot of people get turned off of religion because it's like a throwing the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing. And so a great example, I think, that's tangible for many people that now the requirement for somebody to understand this is somebody that has seen beyond the restrictions of the medical industry, has seen beyond the flaws in the traditional Western medicine. But you can think of, religion in a way being like Western medicine in the sense that it's extremely reductionist. It's extremely, in its own way, dogmatic. There's certain beliefs about health and stuff that that cut out all these other like modalities that are extremely valuable and useful. And you can look back to all sorts of different traditions that incorporate different things like Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine or even Amazonian shamanism, like all these different things that clearly have healing capacities, but all that stuff is thrown out for this reductionist, medical science perspective. And so you can see a lot of the traditional religions essentially being like the medical science version of spirituality in a sense. And so somebody that grows up within that tradition and sees that all these pharmaceuticals, I'm going to use the metaphor, all these pharmaceuticals aren't healing people, they're making people worse. The doctor isn't helping anybody prevent anything. They're just waiting till they get sick. They're in letting them continue to, live an unhealthy lifestyle. You see all these flaws in it. And then you say, and sometimes the reaction can be to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say oh, well, healthcare is just not even a thing. There's I don't even believe in healthcare at all. I don't believe that even exists. And essentially that's where if somebody grows up with in a certain dogmatic or destructive religious environment, they can say, well, I'm done with religion altogether. I don't even I'm done with God altogether. But it's well, you were given this, you were given a destructive version of your experience has been of a destructive version of spirituality. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Right. And if you go back and you can search and you can find things that really work for you, you can actually adopt a lens in which you can look across to any tradition and start, you develop a palette to be able to identify the truth that exists in all different cultures and all different traditions. And then you develop a certain discernment to be able to kind of see through the BS and see to the truth of the situation, just like you can with medical science. I mean, there's certain areas where if you mangle your arm up or something like that, well, the Western medical science is pretty good at being able to put it back together. That's better than other traditions maybe had at different times. And so there's certain areas in which there is something that is that is good about and supportive and holistic about this particular religion.
Absolutely. What an amazing answer. So I do want to talk about the connection between empaths and addiction, because a lot of the clients that I work with are empaths. But I do I hear a lot that you hear a lot of people not validating, I guess, being an empath, right? They think that it's just you're very overly sensitive, or you're kind of just like making up in your mind that you're kind of like feeling you're extra sensitive to these like energies of other people and their emotions. Do you think that there is a connection between being an empath and addiction?
Absolutely. And when I refer to the term empath, essentially I'm referring to extremely sensitive person, or somebody that has more subtle capacities for subtle sense capacities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think absolutely, because when you're more sensitive, you feel more. And when you feel more, that can be, traumas can be more devastating for you. Situations can be more painful for you. One other thing I want to say in my own experience with empathy is that the more work that I do, the more I have realized that a lot of my debilitating empathy,
Mm-hmm.
what is debilitating just because of my unhealed traumas. It's not debilitating because of my predisposition of being empathic. And I think that's a major key for a lot of us, because I think that sometimes the tendency can be to, when we label ourselves as an empath, which I think is a useful label in a lot of ways to describe, what I was describing earlier, and you could go deeper into those descriptions too. But I think that if we're not careful, sometimes we can limit ourselves too. And then it becomes like, well, I'm an empath, and so I can't handle all these other things.
Yeah.
When in my experience, what I found is that it's a lack of knowing myself and being able to be fully present in my body, to which I would squeeze myself out of my body and start tracking all the emotions and feelings outside of me, and not being able to feel okay until the emotions or feelings or situations outside of me felt good, because I wasn't sourcing from my own good feeling.
Yeah.
But then when I can source from my own self and be solid in myself, then that empathy can feel the external, but it's not so affected by it, because I'm not hollow within myself. I have that my own experience with I have the well flowing through me.
Totally.
And I'm right.
I think it's like, yeah, it's learning to, instead of perceiving your empathy as a weakness, learning to turn it into your superpower. And you do that by learning to, like you said, like self-regulate, learning to like emotionally regulate when you're in the moment, instead of feeling like you just need to get away from this. You just want to isolate, you just want to be alone. Because I definitely went through years of that, right? But really it was just my inability to know how to handle and manage those emotions when I was out surrounded by a lot of people. So yeah, that's a great answer. Awesome. And I do want to talk about, we talked a little bit about it already, but the 12-step program, how do you see that working right now with everything that's going on in the world? Because I know a lot of meetings are now on Zoom, so people aren't even getting that social interaction, that in-person interaction anymore.
Yeah, well, it's like any organization in the sense that it's as good as the people that are organizing it and that are there. And so, I think in a lot of ways that there's a great it's like religion in a lot of senses too. There's a lot of really great frameworks mm-hmm. in those environments, but depending on which environment you're in and which people you're around, that frameworks that have had an original intention of a certain kind can get distorted and misinterpreted, and then applied incorrectly. And some of the what I would consider to be like inappropriate applications of what was originally a benevolent principle that got distorted. This is actually this is very similar when I'm thinking to, religion too, and is there are certain aspects in that have kind of become more, what's the word, more prevalent across the entire kind of mentality of the entire like system of the 12-step program. One of those that for me was a big one was the idea of being like bound to your powerlessness over an addiction, or that once you're an addict that you're always an addict, like these kinds of mentalities. And because in my experience, that is not true. I was the addict that other addicts would look at to justify their behavior, because it was that bad. Like I was that bad, and I actually had the ability to make more money than most of the people that were addicts also. So I did way more drugs than them. And because in a way, the only thing worse than being a broke addict is a rich addict for your addiction, in a sense. Not that I was rich by any means, but in comparison to a lot of the kind of more street people that I was with a lot of the time. But so some of these mentalities I think are quite destructive. But again, it's going to be situation to situation. There's awesome people everywhere. And you have different people organizing different meetings, and you have different people speaking about their experience. So it's always going to be different where you are. But I think that, this idea that you have to hide inside AA for the rest of your life, I think that and I'm just gonna point out some of the flaws that I found in some of these circles. The overindulgence of other addictive behaviors that are excused as being, well, this is less bad than alcohol or drugs. In other words, like tons of cigarettes, tons of coffee. There's like, and I remember going to AA conventions. This was back before energy drinks were really like a thing. And energy drinks were like, they're having all these crazy energy, like Red Bull kind of things, like serving them in the place of alcohol, like at the dances and stuff like that. And so you're not getting to the root of what addiction is if you're just swapping it out for something else, right? And so, some of these things I see as flaws, but again, it's situation by situation. And I think that with that same lens I was talking about is this discernment of where is the nectar, where is the truth, that a lot of positivity can be extracted, a lot of good can be extracted from that realm. And that can be a great stepping stone for people, especially that have no other environment where people aren't using drugs. But at the same time, I've also seen people go in there and then pair up with other kind of like on the edge people in those circles, and then like run off and do a bunch of drugs with them. Yeah. So it's hard to say, this is what it becomes difficult to talk about an organization in general, because really what it comes down to is like the individuals in the organization and like their specific decisions and how they're doing things. So like any situation, it really is about the people that are organizing it. But yeah, again, some of those, the primary, I would say, the pervasive kind of philosophies that I think can be destructive is the hopelessness of, once I'm an addict, I'm always an addict. If I ever like go out into the world again, that I'm going to like kill myself from doing a bunch of drugs. That has not been my experience. And there is a point where you can overcome addiction, but the thing is, you don't overcome addiction so that you can like do drugs again responsibly, or you can drink again responsibly. It's like so if you're thinking it from an addictive perspective, then you might, be thinking in that way. But it's like when I got past addiction for myself, it was like, you know, it wasn't like, okay, I'm not an addict anymore, so good, so now I can like do stuff. It wasn't like that. It was just like, that's not even, I'm not like, I don't want anything to do with that. Like, you know, my life is better without.
Totally.
And yeah.
I relate to everything you said. I attended AA meetings for the first year, and it was incredibly beneficial for me to get sober. And I kind of bounced around to different meetings until I found one that I really resonated with because of the person leading the meetings, like you said. But I found the same thing, that standing up and saying that I was an alcoholic for the rest of my life. I got to that point as well where I didn't feel bound by my addictions anymore. So I definitely really relate to everything you said. And can you just tell us a little bit more about where our listeners can find you? And I know that would you call yourself a transformational mentor or a coach? How would you describe what you do?
Yeah, the titles. Yeah, I think those are good. I've been liking the term mentor, because coach has this connotation, or it reminds me of like a PE teacher, kind of like coach thing. But yeah, transformational mentor, coach, like esoteric life coach, like any of those things can kind of, you know, fit the bill. So I definitely help people through their own addiction and their own kind of like thinking process, how to like organize and understand what they're going through, and then use valuable tools and resources to, you know, set themselves up for victory on their path. And the degree to which I go into esoteric, you know, support for that is based off of the individual and their interest in going, you know, down that path. And you can find me. I haven't been putting much content out recently, but I still have my YouTube channel is still up. I actually have a few videos that I'm planning on releasing here in the next, you know, few weeks or so. And that's Patrick Haize, Haize live, Live, on YouTube. You can also find me Patrick Haize live, same spelling, on Telegram. So it's Patrick Haize live. There's also Patrick Haize channel on Telegram. One is a channel, one has a chat on it, right? So it's Patrick Haize, Haize channel, and live on Telegram. And I don't really populate many other platforms anymore. I might put some posts out on Facebook, you know, here and there. But I do have a website, patrickhaize.com, that you could go to also. It's just very, you know, basic and simple. And it has, it explains a little bit about the mentorship that I do, but it's one-on-one, and I have different levels that you can work with. You can go as far as I have a whole 9-hour masterclass that I've put together for understanding the inner workings of our consciousness. So it's like our head center, our, you know, thinking, feeling, and actions, and that goes really deep into esoterics and practices also. And that's part of my mentorship package if you wanted to do a larger package. Or otherwise it's just, you know, one-on-one. I meet you where you are, and we can just, you know, figure out, you know, what's up and what's down, and I support you and hold space for you on your journey.
Amazing. And one last question for you. So if you could recommend 3 books for someone struggling with addiction, what would they be?
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a good question. 3 books for someone struggling with addiction. There was one, I think it was called like, oh, I might botch the name of this, and so hopefully you'll be able to find it, but it's something like Sober Brain or something like that, I think is what it was called. I don't know. Don't quote me on that, because I don't even remember the author's name. But that one was really good. It was, you know, it's talking about the effects of alcohol on the brain. It just makes it like really obvious. Like, okay, this is like not, you know, sustainable or like a healthy practice. One actually, one, I'm going to look on my my Audible right here. One book that I think is incredible, and this is for somebody just for life in general, whether you're going through addiction, or whether you're just wanting to like learn more about love, and this is called The Way of Love by Anthony Demelo, Demelo. That is an incredible book that really breaks down the understanding of attachment. And as you can, as you could probably put together, attachment and addiction are definitely in the same category. And now I'm trying to find Zoom again to click back again. Maybe I can do it this way. So yeah, so that one would be really good. If you know a person named Ronnie Landis, he wrote a book called The Addiction Free Lifestyle. Ronnie Landis, and he's a buddy of mine. I think that's really good too. And see a third one. Well, if you're interested in something that that would be spiritual, I guess the meaning of love is quite spiritual also, but something that is incredible for spiritual development. That if that's one of the avenues that someone's inspired to explore on their path of healing from addiction, an incredible book is called The Way to the Sacred by Adrian Anderson, and it is a culmination of all of his studies of Rudolf Steiner's meditative path, and it's a great way to introduce yourself to Steiner's work, because Steiner's work is so difficult to kind of start getting a grasp on. You have to read so much of it and push so hard to start getting enough of a grounding on it to be able to understand it. And this guy, Adrian Anderson, he's a PhD that dedicated his whole life to kind of decoding Steiner. And so he brings it all into, more colloquial, modern language, and explains a lot of Steiner's stuff in a way that gives you like a backbone for Steiner's work, so that you can understand his stuff a lot better. And that's actually a book that I'm going to be doing a study group with here really soon, which I'm going to, become public about that in the next, month or two, and start like an essential teachings study group in which those who want to join, we can go through these really, really beautiful texts. So I think those are three great books, I think, that would really be of service to somebody on the healing from addiction / spiritual development path.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for being here, and just thank you for being such an uplifting and powerful human being that's so needed right now here on the planet. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Alyssa. You too. Thanks for all the work you're doing. So I really appreciated this, and if you ever want to have me on again, I'd love to be. Love to be on again.
Amazing. Thank you.
Great. All right, great. Thank you so much.